the main thing that has saved me more than anything in the Word and being around others is focusing on who Christ says I am. Not who my kids say I am, not who my boss, my husband, not even who church says I am and my peers. It's who Christ says I am in my identity. And if I can stay connected to my identity, it releases all that shame and guilt and all of the bad things, because it's real easy to get wrapped up in that.
Hey, I'm Madison Virtunis.
And I'm Jessica Leap-Fick.
Ears to Speak is really about loving the people who are around you and learning that faith and spirituality can be a normal part of your conversation with them.
We realize that talking about Jesus and faith can feel really awkward and uncomfortable, but we believe each of us can listen, learn, and love people better.
We are here today with Kyra Langston, and Kyra is from Florida, and we got connected with Kyra through one of our divisional field directors, Emma Reynolds, and Emma has actually been on the show previously.
Yep.
So we invited Kyra on the show today because Kyra has a really incredible story of really how God has taken her life and redeemed it to glorify himself and to give her a new life. So Kyra, we're so excited to have you on the podcast today. Thank you for taking the time to share and go back in time to some of your painful memories and to shed light on how God can take something and turn it around for his good. So why don't you just share with our listeners a little bit about yourself, where you live, what you like to do, share about your family, and anything else you'd want them to know.
I live in Florida. I'm in Brevard County on the Space Coast. I am happily married to a wonderful man, and I have 2 children. My son is 15 and my daughter's 7. They're a little spread out, so it gets interesting at times, but we manage. And gosh, I love the beach, anything outdoors, ocean, the boat, anything fishing, fellowship with friends, cooking out, just enjoying nature and gifts that God gave us too. I spend my free time doing things with my family, of course, and I do like to travel, a lot of outreach. I try my best wherever God leads me. I wouldn't say it's necessarily routine. I just kind of go where I feel led to, help others.
That's great.
Yeah, and I didn't mention, Kyra, you are actually a volunteer with Stonecroft. So how long have you been volunteering with Stonecroft, and what are you up to now?
It's been about a year and a half since I was introduced to Stonecroft. I got asked to be a presenter at a breakaway session for the detox. And I happened to have, be friends with Emma. So it kind of developed and I liked what they did. And I organized story marks last fall here with Emma. And I was drawn to like where they are as they are, and helping people right where they are, because that's where God meets us. And I've done other stuff with her this year. I'm the hub leader for Brevard right now. I have had some changes in my employment, so I don't know how that's going to unfold with Stonecroft, but I'm definitely going to stay connected. So for right now, I'm the hub leader here, and I've done a few Bible studies and other stuff with them.
Great. That's awesome.
Yeah.
For those of you that don't know, Stonecroft has hubs, so groups of women all across the country that basically get together to love their communities, to share Jesus in practical ways, just make a difference together. So if you're interested, you can get on our website, stonecroft.org, and look up a hub that meets near you. So, well, that's really great to hear about your connection with Stonecroft and just the ways you've been able to connect with women in Brevard County. Tell us a little bit about your faith background and your life growing up. What was faith and family like for you as a kid?
I'm from here. I'm from Brevard County. I was in the military when I was younger, so I did travel. I was out in California. I lived in Texas. Growing up, I was in a more strict denomination of church, and I never, not my parents' fault, but in the environment I was in the church, was never really taught about grace and love. It was kind of like you had to earn God's love. You did X, Y, and Z, and then you were a good Christian, and then God loved you. There were things that just didn't sit right with me in certain parts of the word that I questioned. And I found when I questioned them into certain church authority or just needed some clarification, I was taught that I was bad for asking those things. I had a really bad experience with some organized religion as a young child. It kind of scarred me. I didn't understand the difference in religion and being a disciple. I kind of grouped them all together. I was young and I didn't understand. So I stayed away from anything to do with Christ because I was hurt by organized religion.
Yeah.
I spent my adolescence and teens and in college and early youth like exploring philosophies and self-help and psychology, anything I could to get away from it, really.
Yeah.
So I always knew there was something greater. I always knew, we weren't here by accident. I always felt connected to what I was taught that Christ taught and the love, but I didn't necessarily identify myself as a Christian.
Yeah. Okay.
And I still say I'm a disciple of Christ.
Your story, a lot of people can identify with that of they like the teachings of Jesus and the love they see. But yeah, through church or youth group, it can be, kind of misused or you're taught to not have questions. So yeah, that's rough. So you kind of moved around a bit, had some bad experiences with religion, but still was seeking Jesus. Where did things start to kind of go down the path of addiction for you? Because that's a big part of your story.
Right. I started to experiment when I was 12.
Okay.
So I had some pains growing up in childhood. And like I said, I felt almost abandoned. I didn't understand God. I didn't know what was going on. A lot of it was just being a young child with hurts, trying to fit in somewhere. So I was pretty wild when I was young. I ended up in treatment twice before I was 16 for drug abuse and alcohol. I walked into my first 12-step meeting when I was 13.
Wow.
And I wouldn't say I got better, but joining the military, growing up a little bit, things, I just kind of put it aside. The hurts and all the problems were still there. I had just started to function in life. So that got put aside for a while. And I was living a pretty productive life at that point in my early 20s.
So you had joined the military like in your early 20s? So
I was 17 when I went in. So I was young. I graduated early and I left. And I didn't have much a chance to misbehave in the military. I'm pretty strict. So it kind of,
not for
yeah, I had a lot of responsibilities in what I was doing. So it kind of kept me on track. And I think maybe the geographical change, being away from the friends and the trouble I got in here because I was way out in West California, that helped. But like I said, it was just a temporary, it just kind of changed the situation, but I'd never dealt with the stuff inside.
Yeah.
So knowing I was prone to issues like that, I should have known better, but things were good. And I was about 26 years old. I just had my first child, my son, and I had some real bad problems when I was pregnant with my hip. So when I had given birth, they started me in physical therapy and my doctor started me on a strong narcotic.
Okay.
I never abused narcotics prior, so I should have known better, but my father passed away right before I found out I was pregnant unexpectedly. And there was a lot to the situation. So I felt a lot of pain.
Yeah.
And I started to find within the first 3 months with the prescriptions, they masked the pain. They made me feel elated. So it made me feel better. And they gave me energy. They helped me clean the house, be a new mom, go to work, do all the things I needed to do. And I justified it. I went to a very good primary care in a nice area that these were legitimate. The doctor was giving them to me. And I would say within 4 months, it doesn't matter if you're never addicted to opiates mentally or emotionally, your body becomes physically addicted.
Wow.
And so I would say within 3 or 4 months, I was physically, mentally, emotionally hooked. And then it just got worse from there.
Yeah. So you'd had a history of experimenting with drugs and alcohol. I mean, and not just kind of like the party at a friend's house, on a Friday kind of thing, but like 12-step program. I mean, so you'd kind of have that background, but yeah, I mean, so man, as a new mom, I mean, life is just hard in general. And then to begin to cope with life through prescription drugs and having your father die, like that's a lot of stuff going on. So you said you kind of justified using the pain pills because it was helping you kind of get that edge in life. What What started to
Right.
happen over those couple months? Like coping with your dad's death?
There was a lot surrounding that. It's a whole long story, but legalities, things like that, that I was stuck to deal with. And shortly after, about a year later, my brother died of a drug
Oh
overdose.
my gosh.
So it just really, I was still using the prescriptions, but they were still prescribed. It hadn't, it wasn't illegal at that point. But that just was so much grief. And like I said, I had no relationship with God at that point. I still had that hole. So it just sent me into a tailspin, and my life just pretty much fell apart. I couldn't cope, and it just progressed and got worse and worse. And as the pain grows, you need more drugs. And as you take more drugs, your physical tolerance grows. And I would say within 4 years, I always say I went from housewife to a heroin addict.
Wow.
I was full blown on heroin, opiates, IV drugs, crack cocaine. And I looked back and it's like, how did this happen? But, I lived in a victim mentality. It's crazy. You always think all these bad things happen to you and you're so alone. But I've met so many people that have had so much worse and coped with faith, but I didn't have any coping mechanisms. And I felt a victim and I felt sorry for myself. And it's just that vicious cycle. It just goes around and around. I felt sorry. So I did more drugs, and it had become my identity, where I felt like that's what I deserved and that's how I was going to die.
Wow.
And I lived my days like that. At that point, like I said, I still knew I had that hole in my heart, and this wasn't what I was supposed to be, but I believed it's who I was. I at one point went to detox over 17 times in a little under 2 years, about a year and a half. Like, they wouldn't even let me in anymore. They were like, go away. I wanted to, but I didn't want to. We can make a million excuses, and I can tell you I'm a victim of a disease, and woe is me, but I chose to do what I was doing. I regret it, and I've made the changes, but it really is a choice. But it's a hard choice without a solution and without God's love or anyone showing you any different. Even if you don't want to be like that, you don't have the tools to not, and it's just a vicious cycle.
What had happened with your children within those 4 years? Because you had two kids at that point.
Right. My daughter wasn't born yet. So at that point, I thank God for my mother and my stepfather. They took my son for a while, and I ended up getting clean and, had him back. And in and out of the same marriage. It's not the husband I'm married to now. This was my first. And we ended up back together, and I was clean and sober. And as was he. And I had my daughter. And things were good. I was doing the program. I'm adamant about the 12-step programs. They didn't work for me because, it says God as you understand him in one of our steps. They say we put God in a box. I was like, okay, he wasn't the God of my whole life. He was the God of X, Y, and Z, and you can keep me sober, but he wasn't the God of relationships, of finance, of, all the things I needed him to be. And I still at that point had not come and have a personal relationship with Christ. So I was using psychology and methods and doing the steps, but I was still full of ego. I say I'd surrendered, but I truly hadn't. Ended up relapsing again. And we went through a divorce, and I was off and running. Now my mom's got both the kids, and I thank God for her every day, because they probably at that point my life would have ended up in child custody service, but luckily they didn't. I was ripping and roaring for about another year till I got clean and sober for good.
What was the turning point for you? Because, I mean, you say I got clean and sober, but it's like that's not something that just straight up happens. So,
right?
what was
Yeah.
the turning point where you realize, like, I can't help myself anymore? I'm at the lowest of the lowest point.
I was at that time in another county. I woke up in the jail. I couldn't remember how I got there. Luckily, it wasn't like anything major, but I didn't know that. And I woke up in protective custody, laying on the floor, and it was just this turning point. My kids were with my mom. My family wouldn't talk to me. I'm living in and out of people's cars. I have nowhere to live. I have barely the clothes on my back. My entire existence every day is to wake up, do something illegal, or do something I'm not supposed to do, or how I'm going to get one over on someone to be able to stay high through the day. People had become objects, and I looked at everybody as a way to get something I wanted. I felt my heart was cold. It was just cold.
Wow.
And I just wanted to die. I literally wanted to die. So I'm laying on the jail cell floor and I just said, that's it. My God, if you are real, I need you to help me. I have tried everything else and I just can't do this. I'm either going to die or you've got to help me with something. And I was ended up placed in the treatment dorm at the facility, and the most wonderful team. I love them. I love them to death. And she's still one of my mentors today. The chaplain came in and they have a Christian based program at that jail that helps place women in treatment. And, I've been in and out of the system and you end up a number and you kind of get lost in it. And this was the first time ever someone didn't try to I always say, make me say some magic prayer or do that if God was going to love me. She just showed me love.
Wow.
Like when nobody else would love me, this woman showed me love. And that entire team would come every week when they said, and you're kind of forgotten about in the jail. They would come, they followed me from there all the way to treatment, kept my family informed. Like I said, we're still very close today. I actually am speaking at one of their banquets, their fundraisers in a few
Wow.
weeks. I love that team and would do anything for them. I had questions, science questions that went against things that fundamentalists believe. I had all of these things and how could God do this? And she just loved me just like that. She said, I had those questions here. Let me try to give you something to help you. She just accepted me the way I was. And it was the first time I ever really saw like that love in motion and Christ through a person. And you have to remember at that point, I was at a point where I was willing to listen. So it just, everything added up together and my heart opened and I got in my Bible. I read the whole Bible while I was there and I listened and I just was at the point of desperation. Like, you tell me what to do and I will do it. And then I was placed in a faith-based treatment and 6 months later I was back with my children and things were good. And God is just like, from then on and where I'm at now, it's just been such a journey. It's such a journey. It was like just being willing to live for others and just to be authentic of who I am and not be scared to talk about my past. You go to a lot of things like even Stonecroft, I've been to events and people are scared to share, and me and Emma always say it's that me first. Like, I'm willing to talk about my issues
Yeah.
and people just open up. There's not a human being on this planet that doesn't have some kind of issue,
Yep.
no matter what you're struggling with. And we build up so much shame. And it was like all that shame was lifted with Christ. I live a life of freedom. I lay my head down at night and I go to bed and I don't worry. I don't stress. I mean, of course I have moments. Nothing's perfect, but it's just like, and the crazy part is when I got out of God's way, because I was always trying to micromanage everything with the psychology and this and that, and this is the way things are supposed to be. My life is beyond anything I could have planned. And it was getting out of the way and letting God work through me. And I wouldn't trade my life. It used to be a struggle when I didn't have Christ. When I was trying to stay sober, I identified myself as an addict and this is what I am. And it was a battle every day to stay clean and sober. I can't tell you, I don't even think about it. It's not even an option today. I remember where I came from and, I help other addicts and I will never forget that. But it's been such a healing process through the 12 steps and with God in the right way. And when it seemed hopeless, other people filled in that hope for me. And so I try to do that for other people today.
Yeah.
Kyra, you've really shared some really dark times. I mean, you have shared just in the few minutes we've been on this interview, some really painful struggles. I mean, really intense. I'm sitting here like kind of amazed because here you are today saying like, I don't even think about going back to that life. And you were at the lowest point that more than most people experience. And so, I mean, I'm sitting here in my mind trying to figure out like, okay, but what was the point? Or like, when did you feel it? And I just kind of feel like you're a miracle. Like, I kind of feel like, I mean, really, I feel like by being in this jail at the right time and meeting that chaplain and this team of women who really care for you, like God just made a miracle out of you and took away this desire for drugs. So I know that there's probably a lot more than that happened within you, but can you describe maybe the healing that has taken place in your life through knowing Christ?
Wow. It's like a 180. I would say that's really hard to explain. Where I was a taker, I'm a giver. It's like every single thing about me has changed. I'm just a different person and I have a freedom. I don't live of the world. I try my best. I'm not perfect, but I try to see people through Christ's eyes and with love. Where I said my heart was so cold before, it was like, they use the metaphor with the surgery. It literally was. It was like, I remember right after I got to treatment, and it was shortly after I got clean, and, they made us go to church service, and I was sitting there, and I remember thinking to myself, I looked around and I said, God, if something happened to these people, I wouldn't even care. That's how cold my heart was. Like I didn't even feel things when I saw my children, my family. Like I was just ice cold, and it was those defenses I built up to protect, myself and shame and guilt. And I said, please just change me, And so I started to be open, and I'd say it took a few months. I mean, I was diligent in my word and in teachings and listening. And it wasn't an easy process. It wasn't just like one day God said, poof, you're all better. I wish it was that easy. I would have done it a long time ago. It was a lot of willingness on my part and obedience. It still is, we're human, we're flesh, we have issues, but it was taking the time to learn the solutions. And as I started to walk in the freedom, like big things would happen and I didn't respond that old negative way. A major part of that is changing our thoughts and our behavior patterns. And we are responsible for what we think. And I remember that aha moment when I realized, oh, wait, I don't have to be trapped in these negative thoughts. Like I can control this. And sometimes it's just as easy as reading a book or getting in the word or talking to someone or changing it. And so it was little things over time that built up to this. The main thing that has saved me more than anything in the word and being around others is focusing on who Christ says I am, not who my kids say I am, not who my boss, my husband, not even who church says I am and my peers. It's who Christ says I am in my identity. And if I can stay connected to my identity, it releases all that shame and guilt and all of the bad things, because I've done some things that weren't so nice, and it's real easy to get wrapped up in that. So it's walking in my identity and not making any more of a mess on a daily basis. Getting out of those sick relationships, having healthy boundaries, having fellowship, having my group with other women and peers. Most important, helping other people is the best way to get out of ourselves. And we're taught to do that in the Word by Christ. And, the 12-step program teaches that. But I was the person that everybody gave up hope on and said, you're going to die like this. People wouldn't answer the phone and they wouldn't help me. There's always hope no matter how bad you feel,
What has that been like for your family or the other people, folks that have seen family or friends wrestle with addiction to the extent that you have? It can feel a little bit like, okay, sure, you're really sober, you're really clean this time.
Right.
There's a lot of pain and broken trust. So how has them seeing what Jesus has done in your life helped to change or restore relationships?
My children were pretty resilient. I'm their mom. My son was a little more difficult. He's older. It was a process of not what I said, because by the time we give up and get clean, we've told so many lies. Like you said, nobody believes or trusts us. It was really hard for my mom because I'd been clean before. She's like, well, what's any different? Why aren't you going, why are you going to stay clean this time? I would say what changed the most was when things would happen and I was connected with God, and my response was different this time. And I didn't fly off the handle, and I handled things in a godly manner or a calm manner. It took time. They had to see its action. A lot of it was action, responding and not reacting and acting like a drama queen and a lunatic and, handling things the right way. We get so selfish in our addiction. Everything becomes about the drug and our own wants. And that can be in any kind of addiction or relationship, or we put everything before God and before others. So it was like starting to put them first and everyone else's needs first. It just took time. It took time. Me and my mom are best of friends today. I just got off the phone with her before the interview. My husband, we're a blended family. I'm remarried, and my kids love him. He loves them. Have healthy relationships. And also something I learned too was that just like I could control my thoughts, I have a choice on who I'm around. My inner circle, my relationships, I have a choice. I will help somebody that I might not want to be in my inner circle, but that doesn't mean I have to entertain things that are unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like choices like that. And it's just taking time and stability and routine, and nothing comes overnight.
Yeah.
So it's been just as long as I sowed bad seed, nothing changes overnight. As long as I sowed those bad seeds, it can take just as long or sometimes 3 times as long to sow the good seed
Yeah.
for it start to grow. But I wouldn't trade my family life or my family for the world today. They mean everything to me. It's just been amazing. And all the things I think I wasn't qualified for, like work wise or ministry wise or with other people, God has qualified me, and moved me forward to be able to help people. And people are always shocked kind of when it doesn't shock me because I know who I was, but they go, "You what?" And I just try to be the light wherever I go. I think that the 12-step program uses a phrase, and I think it's perfect for the word too. And for God, it's attraction, not promotion. Like the 12-step program doesn't advertise. They don't need to walk up and down the street with banners. And you should attract someone in your sobriety and in your lifestyle to make them want to be the same way. I should offer hope with my behavior, my words, and my actions. And it's the same thing with Christianity and the word. We're told to be the salt and the light.
Yeah.
And I always say God doesn't need a committee of people running up and down. I want people to meet me and say, your joy is contagious. What are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
And that opens the door on an organic, natural level to be able to share Christ with people.
Yeah.
I know I'd shared with you prior, I was hurt really bad. I found myself finding my way into a church in the midst of my addiction and saying the prayer they told me to say. And nobody showed me anything. And I left and I was full of pain and my life was exactly the same. And I felt like I didn't understand at that point, and that this is something out of anything that anyone can take from it. We tend to judge Christ by the actions of man. And when I was able to take that separation, that man tries his best, it's good intention, but man's meth, we're human. And I had to start separating that stuff. And so my approach is a little unorthodox and a little different. I want to be able to have people ask me what's different. A lot of my friends aren't believers, but they love me and they love the joy of me. I feel like it should be natural. People should be attracted. And as God, Christ went through and he traveled, people were attracted to the miracles and the joy and the love that he was bringing.
Yeah.
It wasn't about running up and down saying, this and that. And the body's all different people. However, I don't judge. Everybody's different. Mine's just a little different because I try to take into consideration my own hurts and how I was hurt. So it's kind of how I share. So I hope that my behavior and that's why I so freely share my story and stuff a lot of people wouldn't talk about, because I hope it can help somebody one day and attract them to see what God, because I definitely didn't do this. There's no way. Every time I tried, I ended up back in, jails and detox and, I failed. So it's all God's glory. So hopefully that will attract people.
Kyra, we know that addiction comes in all forms. I think we tend to think like when we hear the word addiction that it's drugs or something like so quote, quote, horrible, but addiction can be really sneaky, and addiction can come in the form of pornography. It could come in the form of your cell phone, which may sound dumb, but it's true. It could be materialism. There are a lot of addictions. And so what would be your encouragement for our listeners who find themselves stuck in an addiction?
First, there's a quote from a pastor. He says, God can't bless who you pretend to be. And I love that.
Wow.
And the first step is getting honest, and addiction does come in all forms. It can even be ego, I mean, it can be anything that takes precedence over God.
Yeah.
So anything that you find yourself losing control over. And then, like you said, that can be in any aspect of your life. I'm freed from my addiction with drugs and alcohol, but I struggle in financial.
Yep.
Money's a fear for me. So I have to apply the same things I do, the tools I use with the drugs and alcohol, to that area of my life.
Yeah.
Codependency is a huge addiction that's overlooked.
With a lot of women. I mean,
right, especially with women. And we are not the savior. God is the savior. So if you're putting yourself as that person's savior, that's an addiction in itself instead of turning it over to God. I would say the first step is getting honest. And if we really trust God, then We shouldn't be scared of judgment. We tend to fear judgment from our peers and the people around us. But I guarantee if you talk about it, somebody else is struggling with something.
Yeah.
So I would say honesty is first, seeking help, finding a good support group. And like I said, the biggest thing, I work the 12 steps. They're for anybody, for anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's just principles to live spiritually and to help others and to get rid of your own garbage and take account your own part in all the things. Even playing victim can turn into an addiction.
Yeah.
And, it's like, what is my part in the situation? Taking responsibility, ownership. And I think those are the things that have helped me the most or helped me maintain that.
Yeah.
But the first step is talking about it and being willing to admit that you have an issue with this. So
I think that's really helpful because, like you were saying earlier, addictions can start really slowly. And, there's
right.
not a woman who wakes up and thinks, boy, I want to be addicted to pornography. I'd love to be addicted to overspending and being in mountains of debt. But I think the advice you're giving of just be honest, because I think, for a lot of women, it's I'm just going to sit down and have one glass of wine at the end of a long day because it's been a rough day. And then before you know it, that whole boxer bottle's gone. And then the same, like it just builds really slowly. And so I think it seems like, kind of what you're saying is even in those places that maybe just feel a little bit like, oh yeah, like it's not terrible. Like I'm not an addict. I'm not hurting anyone. It seems like if you're starting to kind of say those things to yourself, that could be like a good red flag of.
I always say in my brain, if I'm ever convincing myself of something, it's never a good idea. So those kind of thought patterns, the justification, not being willing to admit it because we're justifying, because if we speak it, we're held accountable for it.
Sure.
So if you find yourself hiding something, there's probably something to that. We should be the same person behind closed doors that we are in front of people in Christ or just in general to be a genuine person. So if there's areas in our life that we're unwilling to share or that we're hiding like that, or, we find our brains spewing about it and making up excuses, then there's probably something to look at. And we call it in the program, me and my sponsor says, telling on ourselves. We tell on ourselves because the longer we allow it to fester in our brain and make justifications, the sicker we become. They say you're as sick as your secrets. So if we tell on ourselves and we're held accountable, it's one way to start to nip it in the bud and seek help.
So I know one of the things you mentioned was it's scary feeling judged. And like your story, a lot of people have been hurt by the church. And so it can feel scary to be that person to go first to say, I'm drinking a little bit too much at night, or I've been hiding a gambling problem from my kids or my family. What encouragement would you give to women who may be really scared to tell them themselves because they're afraid of being judged or rejected or hurt? Like, what's a story where you did that and you found love and acceptance, just as an example for other people?
Well, mine's a little different because I was so humiliated at the point that I was laying on a jail cell. It wasn't really anything to hide anymore, It's kind of obvious I had a problem. And now, because of that, people say, you're so transparent. And I'm like, I have to be. And if I live in humility, if I am humble and I know my place with God and where I stand, I shouldn't be ashamed to say those things, and again, it's the identity. It's hard. Sometimes I have thoughts creep up, like working for a church or, nonprofit. Oh, what if people find out, or will people think less of me? And I don't care. I say, God put me here, and I'm not going to live my life in pain and shame anymore. I'm promised freedom through Christ. So I don't care what they say, but I am open and honest. Sometimes there's that fear. I've been around cliche Christian events where everybody acts like everything's so great and perfect, and they're all hurting. And I've just learned to blurt it out, because I look at it like when I blurt it out, it helps them, it helps me, and we can be real. And I don't have time to pretend to be something I'm not anymore in my life. I just don't. I've been through that. If I'm having to put on a mask around other situations or other people, it's not really genuine. It's not my identity and who Christ created me to be. I would say just go for it, or find someone in the 12-step program in step 5. We only have to admit it to one other person. And even if it's just that one other person, but what happens, and the reason for confession and the reason we do that is sometimes we like to say, well, God knows, I don't need to tell anybody. Things get real messed up from our brain to God's, like we can really screw that up. And we need that outside accountability, that third party to see things unbiasedly, to give us an honest judgment.
Yeah.
And find someone you're close to. It doesn't have to be in a giant arena. It can be with your clergy, your coworker, your girlfriend. One word of advice I would give is probably don't find someone who's doing the same thing as you actively. That's not seeking help, because you're just going to make things worse.
Yeah.
We live in a world, an age of technology. You can find any 12-step program for anything, or counselors or anything, even on the web now, so it can be discreet and private. It's just about the saying it. When you say it, it becomes real, and you have to face it,
Kyra, I really am thankful for how you share your story and how open you are and honest you are personally for me, because when you share your story and you go into those details, it gives me compassion for you. And as someone who has been through drug addiction, that's personal for me, because I'm still holding on to hope that maybe my mom will change, because she's still trapped in drug addiction herself. And so when you share your story with people like me, and you don't know when you share your story that you're speaking to someone like me in my situation, but I can have compassion for my mom, where a lot of times that's lacking, because I'm reminded through your story that you've been through some stuff and you're coping with shame and you're coping with guilt. And that's why you do the things that you do. You're not intentionally trying to hurt your kids or your mom.
Right.
Like, you are suffering through your pain that's gone on for years. And that reminds me to have compassion. And so I really appreciate that. So when I think about our listeners today who have family members or friends who are suffering through addiction, what encouragement or advice would you give to them to just keep loving their family member, or what else can they do?
I think you made a good point with the compassion with addiction, any kind of addiction. Like I said, those were my own choices, but I didn't know the truth. I didn't know the truth about who I was. I didn't know the truth about grace and what God could do for me. I didn't know hope. So we're called to help at least these in addiction or any kind of pain. We're broken people.
Yeah.
We're God's people. We're just broken. So being able, I am not saying to enable, everybody's situation is different. My experience, my family got to the point, and it was well beyond deserved. It should have been probably sooner, where they said, don't contact us, don't call us. There was a restraining order, stay away from us.
Wow.
But I needed that because it helped me get to that point where I was sitting on that jail floor. That gave me desperation. And then a lot of times in addiction, anything we can cling on to as a last grasp of hope for someone to enable us will keep us to continue to go. But every situation is different. I don't want to tell someone to be cold and cut everyone off and something terrible happens. But we have to remember, everyone belongs to God, not us.
Yeah.
Our children, our husband, how many people, even at Stonecroft events I've met, when I share, I think I have nothing to offer someone that hasn't been through addiction. I share my story and they're like, my daughter is in treatment, or my son is in jail, or I think it affects, we all have addiction, not necessarily drugs, but one way or another. I was at a church service one night. There was about 3,000 people, and it was like the coolest thing ever. He asked, anybody with this kind of addiction stand up, anybody with codependency, and the entire congregation was standing. I mean, it affects everyone in such a strong way. Each case is different, but there's always hope. As long as someone is breathing, there's always hope. It's just to love them through that, try to see them as Christ sees them and as broken people. And I encourage everyone in any kind of situation like that to define healthy boundaries, biblical healthy boundaries, to help you and to help them. Just because we have boundaries and we say no doesn't mean we don't love them.
Right.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think, like you mentioned, all of us have been touched by addiction in some way, whether we're struggling with it or family or friends are. So that's really great, just to have that posture of compassion and prayerfulness, but also healthy boundaries of, I'm going to love you, but I'm still going to do that in a way that's honoring to God and to, the person. So Yeah, we're so grateful that you're willing to share your story with us today. And we really hope for our listeners that as you've heard Kyra's story, that maybe there were some things that came up for you that you realized, yeah, stuff's getting a little out of control for me. If you're in that place, we'd love to hear from you. Shoot us an email at connections@stonecroft.org or post on our Facebook page for Ears to Speak. We'd love to pray for you and just encourage you to seek Jesus in all these things, and pray for a friend, pray for folks in your life to keep having hope when things seem hopeless. So, Kyra, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Ears to Speak today, a podcast sponsored by Stonecroft Ministries. If you liked what you heard, please go right now and subscribe.
Do it. Just subscribe it. Also, if you have feedback, questions, comments, suggestions for what you want to hear in the future, check out our Facebook page, Ears to Speak, or shoot Madison or myself an email at connections@stonecroft.org. We hope today that you were inspired to listen, learn, and love people better.